Hello, everyone, and welcome to our CTO Roundtable webinar, Reducing Costs and Increasing Customer Value, a Roadmap to Modernizing Legacy Software. We are so pleased that you could join us today. This webinar is for technology leaders of all stripes who are contending with legacy applications that are crucial to your business, but are built on old technologies that can't meet your current business requirements. So my name is Emily Butler, and I am a client engagement manager here at Symphonize. I am joined by 3 CTOs who have been in your shoes before. Collectively, they have more than 70 years of experience in the IT industry, and they have planned and executed numerous initiatives to update legacy applications. So, without further ado, let's meet our panelists. So, we are joined by Kaiser Ahmed, who's the CTO of Eldermark Software. He has more than 2 decades of experience leading projects and managing teams for organization-wide initiatives that drive growth through engineering. So Kaiser is passionate about maximizing operational and cost efficiencies while reaching tangible ROI targets. We also have with us Ed Rose, the founder and CTO of Packets. He is an accomplished IT leader and a serial entrepreneur with nearly 30 years of experience. He's transformed multiple businesses by implementing new technologies, overhauling revenue-generating applications, and fostering an open culture of learning and experimentation. And last, but certainly not least, we have Sridhar Tirumala, who's our co-founder and CTO here at Symphonize. He has more than 20 years of digital transformation experience, and he is passionate about bringing technology from the data center to front and center in the business. He is a fanatic about serverless and microservices architectures and loves building and running applications at a massive scale with less code and infrastructure. So with that, I am going to pose our Ed, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you too, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to bounce this first question over to you, and that is, how do you know when it's time to modernize your legacy software? Are there specific metrics that point to the need to do this now? Like, know when it's time?
Well, I think that there are a few, axes of this to measure this. I think that the first one is if your legacy software is built on technology that is probably getting pretty long in the tooth, you're probably facing some end of life issues with with the components, if not the system, major systems themselves. So that can be a deciding factor, because once it's end of life and not supported, it's not compliant most of the time. And even if it were, you wouldn't want it. So I think that if the underlying software is not, I guess if the vendor themselves is not investing in that software, why should you? Is the short answer to that. So if they're not supporting the software, then you shouldn't be putting any more money into it. The other thing is, what kind of opportunity cost are you paying for not having software that does more? And that will you'll usually find that out when it's too late, when your competition or something has happened that you can't cope with, and you're left in a disadvantageous place. So, it's better to start moving, now. I can't think of many situations where it wouldn't be appropriate to start now, whether that's a slow start and doing it a little bit at a time and doing it incrementally, or whether it's, just diving in. But I don't see many reasons to not be getting in the pool at this point. I don't know, those aren't really key metrics, but they're kind of what I would look for.
Sridhar, Kaiser, do you have any additional thoughts on what it is that really triggers you to say, no, we can't wait any longer, let's start tackling this?
Well, yeah, I can just my 2 cents here. I agree with everything Ed said, especially one of the more obvious ones is, of course, if there's an end of life looming for components or your whole stack. Other things to consider are, of course, market response to your product compared to what are emerging technologies and what are your competitors using, right? So your market share is always going to be one of the factors that you're looking at when making this decision, amongst other things. But yeah, as far as key metrics that really point to the need, certainly one of the metrics that you can look at right out of the get-go is projection of what the effort is going to take, because of course it's going to cost. It's going to cost money, manpower, all that. Is there a return on that investment? Can you segment your milestones so that you can realize incremental value? So those are a lot of the metrics that would help point to that need for modernization.
Yeah,
Thank you.
looking from a technical perspective, there's a couple of things that we really need to focus where the security is a one thing where if the software runs out of the support or if we don't patch it up, in a timely fashion, it quickly becomes risk averse and it also causes the security and the data leaks, and also it's always better to be safer on the looking at the data perspective and the application security aspects, and looking into that and making a quick decisions is also a key thing.
One more thing that I neglected to say is if you look at what is being supported, generally these are deployed, these are hosted apps. And if you look at vendors, what vendors are supporting on their SaaS offer, which is almost always where they're investing, as opposed to their old offer, you'll see that there's a difference in what's being supported. And basically the good stuff is going to the people who have bought it recently, not to you. Another reason that you're not getting, you're just paying for really a lot of money for a support of an old system. So, and while the other people are getting the goods.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to bounce this one over to you, Kaiser. I know, frequently with our clients, it's not like they're only contending with one legacy system, right? Chances are good that you have multiple, possibly intertwined legacy systems that you're contending with. How do you prioritize which systems to tackle first?
Well, if I stick with a purely technical and engineering perspective, I generally just like to be careful and focus on factors like, risk, size, the stack itself. Again, if there's any looming end of life for support and maintenance for components or the stack that are coming. So from the technical perspective, there's quite a few things, right? But oftentimes from the business perspective, that does create a big priority, where as long as the prerequisite of absolutely needing to modernize the legacy product is present, I would recommend prioritizing, believe it or not, some of the client-facing ones first, but very, very carefully. And the reason why I say that is because if you do it well, do it careful enough, and if you can do it incrementally, then that approach can actually yield business dividends from the existing client base in forms of upsells, churn risk reduction, and also from the market through just the tech organization collaborating with the product organization, marketing and sales, right? So there can certainly be early dividends that provide tangible evidence for additional funding than needed to continue additional modernization across other systems.
Interesting.
You get some draft too, right? You get some draft if the salespeople are happy, most everybody's happy, and if they're not, then it's going to be a problem. So I think that you're right. You got to show early wins, whatever it is, show some wins and get some win, behind you because it's going to be in front of you because people don't like new systems. But that's really and it can be, depends on the situation as to where you need to get that win behind you. It might be internal, it might be external, but it's important to know who's going to be dragging and who's going to be, pushing.
Yeah, I think one other thing that I usually look into when I get into these engagements is to really understand where is the most pain point. right? If is it really a customer experience, or is it really a system's uptime, like a system constantly going down? This is another thing. So we also in a consulting we have to show quick progress, quick wins, win the stakeholders confidence back, right? So we definitely want to evaluate these systems in the landscape, across the ecosystem, and understand what exactly is gives a quick win. That's where we could also start. That's another thought.
Well, I'm really glad all of you guys mentioned this question of winning over stakeholders, right? Showing quick wins and proving that this is the right path you should be going down. Because that's actually my next question. And I'm going to bounce this one over to you, Kaiser, as well. That how do you go about building a business case for modernizing legacy software? Like from jump, what's the best way to convince your stakeholders that the juice is worth the squeeze here?
Yeah, I can't stress enough that the value delivery has to be incremental, right? Because then you're just simply dealing with how long can someone tolerate this for, essentially, before they can see value. So it's got to be incremental, and you have to be able to demonstrate that. So some ways to do that involve roadmap, that involve road mapping. Is the migration, let's say, of existing resources to the new product, right? Because there's some efficiencies and cost savings there. Slowly dropping other costs, whether it's licensing costs or whatever, around legacy resources. Eventually, you want to show that incremental reduction and then the eventual reduction of R&D as a percentage of revenue for the company. Now, remember, there's not a ton of valuation in perpetual new investments, right? But there is valuation for an organization that's reducing costs that are needed to manage products. On the flip side of this, okay, that also helps is that early focus on client and market adoption of a modernized product creates that real value around reducing that client churn risk, around creating new sales opportunities. So you can certainly attack that from both the technical and engineering side as well as the business revenue sales side.
Yeah, there's almost certainly with the legacy system. There's always a list of things that people have been asking for time immemorial, and they've given up on it, and they're just dealing with the system as it is now. And if you can start going back into the into that list of things they wish they had, validating them because they may not have ever need them, but they might, and start giving them those. That's more political, but there might be some gold in there. And then, of course, the other thing is really you want to make the case for. I mean, I'm always trying to make the case for as much investment as possible, right? You should be creating a business case that says this is going to create so much value that you will want to invest more, as opposed to always pushing it on the cost side. Push on the ability to make this strategic and or making money, so that then they see where it's going. Which is really that's got to be the theme here. Is you got to get this out of the back room and into the front room.
All right. One for you, Sridhar. Are there any frameworks that you recommend for creating a roadmap for modernizing legacy software? Where do you start?
So, yeah, there are a great question. There are several frameworks that we could use for creating the roadmap for modernizing the software. The best approach really depends on the size and the complexity of the project. But I typically look into like a 3 to 4 frameworks when I get into an engagement, especially. By the way, the framework, this is not a tool or a software. This is more of a methodology that we use for basically looking at for each engagement. So the first and foremost thing that comes to my mind is the one is widely used from a long time. It's a legacy application modernization framework. It's called LAMP. It has 7 phases. It starts with the planning. You define the scope and identify the stakeholders, and you establish the project goals and all, and then you do an assessment of the application in total, right? And identify the technical and the business risks and and assess all the pain points. And then you get into the architecture, looking at the current architecture and the to-be architecture, and then we do the design, and then we get into the development and testing phase, from there to deployment and operations and maintenance. So it's kind of a process where you do it in a step by step, like like kind of almost like a waterfall kind of an approach. But it works really well for very complex and large, modernization projects. So the other one that I could think of is the MAP, which is the Modernization Assessment and Planning Toolkit. This is one of the process that is coined by Microsoft, mostly used for the infrastructure modernization and the migrations to the cloud. So it includes a set of tools and the templates that you could use for the to validate the technical and business viability, right? And it's very popular in the organizations that are looking to migrate to the cloud. So there is a comprehensive process here in this toolkit to where you could look into the target applications and evaluate what is the each there are certain tools also it comes with where you run the tools in the system and gather as much data as possible, and then you use the data to look into the risk and address those ones. The other approach that I see is like the Gartner's approach. The Gartner also came up with a five-phased approach where you do a discover, and then you do an assessment, and then you plan and execute, right? This is a much more simpler approach, but Gartner came up with. This is also it's widely used because it came from the Gartner, so it has this. But what it does is like it again runs at a much higher level and much more of a again it will be broken down into the multiple phases within itself, but at a highest level it is more of a five phases is what they call it. The that's the one approach. The last and my most favorite one is like the which is a ADM framework, which is a application development and maintenance framework, which is mainly used for the small and or medium migration projects where you almost run this framework in a agile fashion, right? It's very flexible and adaptable to the different methodologies and the technologies that we use. And it also has a key focus on the DevOps. How do we engage the DevOps early in the process, right? And build these things in incrementally, right? So those are the key things. Like mainly this is also very useful for the SaaS applications, like where service-oriented architectures and with the more emphasis on the modularity and the reusability of the components and having a separation of the concerns. So this is typically used for most of the applications that we migrate. We look into this as our key thing, and it has four phases. Like also we have a requirements that you gather, all right, and then we do the design, implementation, and maintenance, and then we iterate it. We iterate it in a smaller chunks, like an MVP. You do an MVP, and then you expand the scope further, right? And you expand the use cases, and also we can also target to a specific products, right? Or a specific geo, like targeting a specific geolocation, and then you expand into the other. So this incremental approach is very useful, and it also um, helps stakeholders realize the value very early in the process, right? Where they instead of a big bang approach. So most of the times that not most, I think early in my career, I used to go to these big implementations where at the end, there is no go no go decisions. So typically it's like there is no go. It's a go because of the approach that we take and the amount of the complexity and you're doing a big bang, right? It's kind of like, you're bringing all the systems in one shot and, trying to, it's very nervous situations for all the parties involved, right? So we try to avoid as much as possible, right, for the migrations, especially. Or the modernization application. So yeah, these are the typical ones that I see. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Sridhar. Ed, do you have experience with these frameworks in the real world? You were nodding a lot. I feel like there might be something you want to add here.
Well, I think, I mean, yes. I mean, the big bangs I've been through. I mean, I'm the oldest here. I think. Thank you for understating my experience. And in the beginning, it was really, the limitation was the technology. It wasn't. It was, there were a lot of blowups. A lot of companies got hurt. A lot of vendors got hurt. A lot of careers got hurt. And so, it was very unpleasant. So, what I like about today, and the way we've done things is you can do proof of concept. You can do a proof of concept on the actual, the platform you're going to be using, and then you can just scale it up. Because that's one of the key things about the cloud is you can use it for free, or you can use it this much. You can use as much as you want, and then you're basically ready to go. You've got a working prototype that will turn into your production environment. I mean, you've got to do some things, and some of those things are the other things I would do in terms of a framework. I would also always continue all the way through to business continuity, which is always thought of last, and making sure that you got all that stuff, because that's another one of the big benefits you can get, and it's also a hammer you can get because it's compliance. Then you can get compliance on your side, and then you can wave the compliance banner, and that makes things a lot better. So you got that going for you in terms of the tailwind. But so proof of concept is really something, and an iterative thing, because by the time you get that done, people have seen it, they've experienced it, your staff understands how it works. That's really important. Now they know what to do, and then you just add it in. And those are the things that I guess I was shaking my head and do. Big bang, not a good idea.
Yeah.
If it can be at all avoided, it makes everybody unhappy.
Yeah.
Okay, and Kaiser, I happen to know that you have opinions on this topic as well, having contended with it before. So what is your take on this whole question of, incremental, big bang, somewhere in between? How do you approach this?
Yeah, so when we talk about, when I look at this from a holistic perspective, right? When we say big bang versus incremental, let's take a second to delineate between development versus deployment, right? I'm always for incremental development, right? That's no question. I'm always for that. But how you release and deploy does depend on the situation. And as technologists, we have a big impact on that. Oftentimes we lose sight of development versus deployment, right? And there needs to be that delineation. Big bang deployment for a release, let's say, introduces large, significant costs and overhead for things like client adoption, training, support ramp up, sales training, implementation, conversion, staffing, all that. So these are a lot of things that we don't think about when we do that big bang approach. There's just an organization-wide impact across the board, and everybody's going to be looking at you about it, right? Whereas incremental, at the same time, it's not that it's all squeaky clean when it comes to deployments, right? Incremental also has some risks where if I create incremental deployments of releases, right, I can create risk for my clients who are using those systems because there'd be insertion of new factors into their existing and probably stable daily workflows, right? So, and sometimes with clients, the perception is that once the product's available, after it's, let's say, dev done, that we can simply throw the software over the wall and that's it, right? But we've got to consider that, even with the incremental pieces, there's still operational impacts. There's risks to the internal organization, and there's still risk to the clients if you don't do it right. So there's pros to both, really more on the incremental side, but there's pitfalls to both as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. One other thing is this whole idea of it goes back to this whole proof of concept. The ability to fail fast iteration is a really good thing, because you can fail and see, you can ideate and then fail right away. And when you fail right away, you don't get it all the way through to production. And sometimes those failures are waiting for you, they're lurking. And so fail fast is a really good way. And it sounds bad, but it's really good because you want to fail when you get the least amount of pain. If you get to max pain, which is that big bang day, and you find out that you had a border condition and the whole thing comes down, that's max pain. And so it's really good to test the hell out of things and to test it in the concept as well as it's the best time to test it is right up front. And it's possible now. It's prototyping at its best. I mean, the cloud is made. Basically, it takes all your work and it front end loads it. It's great because by the time you pass the POC, you're past 80% of the way there a lot of the time. One last thing with this framework discussion: a lot of these things are not going to be made by you, right? You're not making nearly as much software. Either it's going to be low code or no code or microservice or somebody else's software. So that's a whole different can of worms too. And so you have to account for that in your thinking because you have to go outside on a much more regular basis. And you have to so you can't the make buy analysis happens daily, or more than that. It's not just big chunks anymore. It's little chunks, and that means that the data part is you need to get your data model correct so that you can accommodate these things as they spread across. And I think that the data situation, the data model is probably the thing you got to spend the most time thinking about as you're incrementing your way, because the widgets work, but the data has to actually work across the whole organization, and nobody's done that for you. There's no SAP here. You're the SAP now, and so you're in charge of making all this data work together because all these components don't know about each other, and so that's really important.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you added, Ed, where data is going to be the super key, right? The application can transform, not so much with the data, right? We got to, there's an opportunity, to clean up the data, to basically, dedupe and all. That's a whole another conversation, on that. But however, the taking care of the data and doing the data modeling into the aligning it to the new application is a super critical phase of the in the modernization, where our code when we move it to the cloud and part of the code may be thrown away because there are so much components or APIs available in the cloud, right? We could leverage those, but plugging into the same data, right? And this is it's such a key step. Looking at the data and is equally or more important than the applications itself.
And the only other thing is I have an issue with the word modernization because we don't want to just modernize. We don't want to automate the old system. That's what we used to say. Don't automate the old system. Don't just recreate the old system on better software, because it used to be that it all tipped over all the time. So you got it onto out of your punch cards and into something with tapes and then from tapes to whatever. But that's not what we're really doing here. There's no way a legacy system that's that old is the right thing that you should be using now. I mean, unless it's an application I'm unaware of. It's got to be different. So you really aren't trying to just modernize it. You're trying to update it too. So you got to do both. Whether you do that, it has to be it certainly has to be in the framework, and it should probably be in the. That's a good way to get big wins. If you add a microservice that's really slick, those are deeply engineered items. So when you go to a Twilio, they have thought through something as simple as delivering a pass, an auth code, really well. That's why it gets there so fast. And if you use an emailer, they don't get stuck in spam. When you do it yourself, because an engineer says we could write that, and you could, but it would be dumb because you would never get the money back, and they would get caught in the spam filter. Just by testing it, you'd be doomed to spam hell forever and ever. But so you don't get anything from that. So the point here is modernize and then update. Don't just modernize. If you just modernize, it's definitely an opportunity lost.
Oh, okay. Well, I actually think that was the perfect lead in to my next question. because basically what you're saying is this is not just about shedding technical debt, right? This is about making sure that the new software really meets your business requirements as they exist today. And so my next question is how do you ensure that your modernization roadmap, I know you don't like the word modernization, but for lack of a better term, that your roadmap is aligned with your overall business strategy?
That's for me, I guess. So, well, this is going to be an answer I think that non-IT people will hate, because I don't know if there are non-IT people.
Let's assume we're all IT people.
Oh, good. Because I guess for a little history lesson, I think I when I started out, there was no IT department. Literally, I mean, I remember a time before IT, and that was pretty wild, because we would be doing these projects, and there was no IT to call. Nobody to call. There wasn't even the idea that IT could exist. So we got software, and we were told to make that work. And all the people who were involved with making the thing that the software was to do would get involved, and we formed a team. And no projects had ever been done. No idea of how to do anything. So we relied entirely on the vendor. Quickly we learned that the vendor also had no people who worked there who had ever done what we were hoping to do with the software. So in the end, we were really responsible for knowing everything about the software, how it would be used, because they didn't know. We literally didn't know. And so that was a really important lesson for me, because it turns out that when the business has to own the software, there is a moral to the story. When the business has to own the software, they get good at it. And when things start going south, which is what started happening, right? So then we got into like the SAP thing, and in the early 90s, and things, big explosions happened, and everybody that was in operations and sales and in finance, they said, "Oh, this stuff can blow up. So it's not an opportunity for me; it's a risk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an IT department, and I give it to them, so they will have all the risk." And that's what we did, right? And we were the risk managers. And not only did we manage risk, but we managed it by keeping the business from trying to do too much with the software. We were limiting the use of the software so that it would work, because the software wasn't that stable, and the systems they were pretty fragile. So we stopped people from doing bad things that would hurt them. That's what we've done for 25 years. And that's meant two things. We haven't been particularly creative, because when we were functional people making it work, we had to be creative. We didn't know what we didn't know, so we just kept on trying, and we did it, but it was in a business context. The technical stuff came. We learned technical stuff. That's how I got into IT, because I kept breaking and I had to figure out how to fix it. So I learned Unix commands and then screw those up, and then became a Unix admin. But that's how it happened, right? A lot of people that joined, IT in the early days were business people in functions that just migrated to the job because they were technically inclined. And so what we've done is we've sort of bred that out of the business. And now we don't have as much technical knowledge in the business. People are not that techy, and we should put that back. So this all goes to say, how do you ensure that it's aligned with the company? It shouldn't be IT's problem, right? The business strategy and the whole thing should be the business's problem. And the best thing we can do is start that happening, because the strategy should be, granular enough so that it informs the IT needs. We should be the customer of that. We should be the customer of a strategy that gives us enough information so we can make it work. Because right now it doesn't even consider it. So that's why they'll hate that, because it's not our problem. Technically, it is our problem though. So, but that's my speech, is that IT cannot continue to be what it's been. We cannot do it. The business has to become much more involved, and we have to become curators, and we have to become process curators as well. We have to give people a good process so that it works across the organization, and we have to be curators of all these widgets so that we make sure that they work together. But we should not be making strategic decisions. We should be pushing that out, because that's ultimately, now that we're not limited by the software, it's going to be the quality of the ideas that's going to make the software valuable. And if they're not valuable, then it won't be worth it. So, but that's not our problem, because we're not the business people.
What's your take on this perspective, Kaiser?
So as far as aligning the technology roadmap with the overall business strategy, right? I'm actually going to go a little bit. I agree with Ed. I'm going to go the other route and throw something out there for the non-IT people. That essentially, look, as technologists, I'll admit, sometimes we have to rein ourselves back in as well, right? Because we don't do things and we don't make things because it's cool or cutting edge, or we shouldn't at least, right? Even though it's fun to do. We do it because we can clearly deliver and articulate value. It's something that I preach to my team all the time. We do it to mitigate risk, and we do it to deliver value. Whether that's, some examples, like whether it's new revenue opportunities or cost efficiencies, right? It's got to be articulable and demonstrable. But yeah, it's just at the end of the day, it just comes down to delivering value. And if we can do it while employing cutting edge technology, then great. All the better.
One more comment about needs. The strategy, it's really difficult to envision what the technology should do for you if the needs are not, if they're latent needs, these needs that users don't know they have. The users don't know they have it, so they're not going to come to you with it. This is the Steve Jobs, thing. You can't ask a customer what they want because they don't know, because there's a latent need that they're not aware of. And those things exist, and I think that is the responsibility of, because that's a combination of what's possible technically and what's an idea that would be useful. Because a lot of times we just say, oh, that's impossible. So I think that IT does have a role to play in identifying latent needs, and you do that by being intensely observant of what's going on in the business, so you can start seeing, oh, if they could do this, this would be really good. And you don't have to think about how. You just have to think about there's a latent need here. Nobody's identifying it, but if we could do it, it would be great. That's an opportunity. But nobody, it's by definition almost impossible for the people who are doing it to identify it, because they don't know they otherwise they'd know it. It wouldn't be latent anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a matter of, don't be afraid to propose, solutions or propose value, right? Because I agree with that. It's oftentimes people don't know what they truly want or need, and that is a thing that we can do as technologists, is propose different avenues or solutions or just different ways to get to that value problem.
Excellent. So I think we've touched on this question of risk a little bit already in some of the other questions, but I want to dive into this with Kaiser for you to start. I think that at the beginning of these projects, it can feel very overwhelming, right? Because you can see all of the types of risk that are going to enter into this. What are the big risks that you see in software modernization projects, and how do you go about mitigating for those?
Yeah, I definitely have some experience with this one. That's in a previous life working for a Fortune 50 company, I did discover that, look, if you can freeze new development on a legacy system and then modernize in a separate branch or space, then that would be ideal, right? And when I was in a Fortune 50 company, you can afford to do that, right? But in order to minimize that disruption to the operations, right? But we all know that can't always be the case, right? Especially when you have things like regulatory factors or commitments that you've already made, where you can't just freeze the development of the legacy system in order to then push out a modernized version. So if that's the case, if that ends up being the case where you are forced to constantly touch your legacy system while you're trying to actually create a new modernized experience, you're perpetually facing that risk of feature parity mitigation versus scope overrun for the new product, right? Because every time I touch that legacy system, now I got to do it all over again. And I don't know if it's going to be easier, harder, or whatever. Or I'm going to, and maybe it's not the same thing over again, but I'm still going to have to account for it. So it's always ends up being that risk is always that battle between feature parity mitigation and scope overrun for the new product, right? So as an organization, I in my opinion, you got to be ready to severely scrutinize any changes that are proposed for legacy at that point. And you have to be ready to challenge what that perceived value would be for that change. Everybody, might think that this particular enhancement would be the bee's knees, right? But we have to challenge that and think about what are workarounds or better solutions, or can we afford to wait so that we don't create that feature parity and scope overrun risk.
One other thing, one other thing that I see is I like what Kaiser said earlier, right? Focusing too much on the technology is also not good. It's one of the risks, right? Because the technology is there to, enable, the use cases that we want to solve, not it by itself, right? So focusing on the business value is definitely is much more important. And also we shouldn't really ignore the legacy code, as much as we want to migrate from it and throw away because it is built over the period of time. It has some critical components, right? Where it must be included in the modernization effort, which we can phase out slowly, right? It's not like it's very tempting to throw it everything away and take the use cases and take the data and start building the new things, but it's which is not quite practical, right? So that's also an important way to look into how we can carry forward some of that critical components, part of the application, be put a wrapper or put a service around, to keep using that and migrate that one or at a later point of time. And rushing through the process is also another major common mistake. We try to see the value much sooner, like, than the patience is also really important. And testing is obviously a critical component. We often fail, end-to-end testing, like, have a multiple cycles, like, system integration testing, user acceptance testing, stress testing, performance testing. These are all very, very critical, I think, for, common mistakes that we often do in the migration projects.
So I'm reminded of this. I'm going to bring it back to the question, but I'm going to start with something I saw in Tokyo on the subway. You see children all the time, very young children riding the subway, like much younger than 5 years old, 5-year-old child, with a little cap and in their uniforms, and you think, my God, what are they doing on the subway? How could they possibly? It can't be safe for them to do that. One, it's much safer there, but two, what they say is because everyone there, every woman, they don't say the men, they say every woman is that child's mother. So that child's got a lot of mothers around, and you would not want to start. If there's any trouble with the child, you would be in deep trouble because everybody's watching for that child. We don't have that with our projects. If the projects are babies, everybody's like, that's IT's problem. We need everybody to be the mother of the IT products. We don't do that. We don't engender that people care about it. They don't care about it and they don't feel responsible. If you have that many more eyes, because whenever you go to a postmortem after something's screwed up, you find out that people knew about the problem. And people were saying, oh, I knew that was going to happen. It's because you don't have those people seeing themselves as mothers. They just see themselves as getting as far away from the explosion as possible. And that's a big difference. So if they think so you can either do that through making sure they know that they're going to get exploded, or the nice way is to engender this feeling of, wanting this project to succeed. And I think we don't do that's a once removed thing, but that many eyes will catch a lot of problems.
Yeah, totally.
So I think we just talked about some common mistakes that we've seen when we're trying to modernize legacy software. But what are some others? Like, talk to me about the disasters that you've seen where you went, oh God, if only I had known blank. Ed, I'll pop it over to you first.
I only had known. Oh my God, there's so many of those. There's so many examples of people. I mean, again, it always comes back to the people side of it. I think the methodologies only go as far as the people are willing to put their skin in the game and invest in them. And when you're checking boxes, check boxes don't go that far. So I think that the mistake is to not spend enough time communicating and really understanding what is important to people and really getting them invested in it. I mean, now there are lots of other mistakes to make along the way. That, simple things that language, when you're doing international things, language can be a big issue. Misunderstandings can come about. And ironically, usually the language issues are among people who speak the same language, but only different versions of it. But there are, there's been a million different things. Or there's we do things differently, or I didn't know, we found out that one of the in China in Taipei that our warehouse was like on going up in as they do. I didn't know that was up 10 floors of a skyscraper. Who ever heard of a warehouse that was like that? And as a result, we had problems because we didn't have that dimensionality. But so there are things that are common to either places or languages or things that those are where the cracks exist in projects that you really need to make sure that your people have an understanding of the subject matter that's good enough to understand that there's a problem. Because if people think, oh, that's somebody else's expertise, I don't have to worry about it, they don't pay attention, then when it finally comes to them, they're like, oh, now it's their expertise. So I think people have to be cross-functionally aware. They need to be technical and they need to be subject matter experts in what they're subject matter experts, but they have to be conversant across all of it, or you don't catch the mistakes.
Yeah. I think that really speaks to your ideas about the problems with having siloed IT and that really needing to move back into that cross-functional world between IT and the business.
But the other phenomenon that I see happening all the time is if you have a PhD, the sister-in-law who had she was above PhD, whatever that is, and she would talk and I would just nod my head and I'd pretend like I understood, which I did not, right? And that people do that all the time, but I understood nothing. But she thought I was understanding until I told her, nobody understands what you're saying. And that happens all the time. So if you can't, the idea has to be, and I think this is a big role for IT, is to get people to be, the higher the level of that conversancy, the better the product's going to be. Because you cannot become a PhD in every area, and you can't become an expert. You can't get 30 years of experience in any of the other functions where they also have expertise. And so you have to understand it. You have to encourage everybody and we've done this, do, brown bag lunches that dumb it down, say it for somebody else who doesn't understand it and make them understand it enough so that they can be, conversant. And that's a really important thing because biotech, all the things we're doing, you can't be that much of an expert, but you have to understand it enough to know where the problems are going to be. Yeah. Now I'm done.
Would anybody else like to chime in on this subject of common mistakes you've seen? Kaiser?
Sure. Not just common mistakes I've seen, it's common mistakes I've made. I'm not ashamed.
You'll own it.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed to admit it. As long as you learn from it, right? I've made plenty of mistakes with scope overrun, cost overrun, timeline overrun, right? And so I'm going to take an approach of reverse engineering that so I can understand how I got there, right? And this really does dovetail off of what Ed said. I completely agree with that. One of the most common mistakes that I've seen, and hopefully this doesn't sound oversimplified, but a significant lack of communication between technology and product ownership. It always leads to scope creep, always leads to that overrun. I'm a big advocate of talk often and freely, and I'm a big advocate of educate each other because you can't be everywhere all at once, right? Product groups should educate on what and why. The technology groups should educate on how and when for delivery, but don't also pigeonhole yourselves either. Just communicate clearly and often with the rest of your organization. Especially by the way, oftentimes with these modernization projects, we talk about an MVP approach, right? Minimum viable product approach, right? So especially in that case, talk often and educate each other because a modernized MVP product doesn't necessarily equal all of the new features and toys and bells and whistles that everybody's been asking for years, right? So there's a big educational component to that and how you communicate that within your organization. Get that MVP out first. You have your baseline, you have your stable baseline, and then you continue to build and continuously, forever, perpetually. But that all comes down to how we communicate internally so that it's almost like keeping each other in check on what our objectives are.
I just want to check one big mistake is one thing you have to be very careful about is slipping your plan. And knowing when to and when not to. You slip it once, you might get away with it. Don't slip it twice. If you're going to slip it, make it a good slip and make it committable. Because you start slipping it again and again, nobody believes it, and nobody pays attention ever again. And that is a big phenomenon. If people think it's coming, a deadline sharpens the mind, right? If they have a deadline coming, they will pay attention. But if they think every time, someday it will be the deadline, and they'll be like, oh, we didn't know it was going to happen because they've slipped it 10 times already. So, we didn't know. We didn't think it was true. So, on the other hand, if you have to slip it, don't go live anyway. Don't jump into the maw of the beast, but stop, but then be really careful about not doing it again.
So don't be the boy that cries wolf. Make sure there's really a wolf there if you're going to do it.
So, be a voice, be authoritative, right? Don't decommit more than, decommitting multiple times is death to a project. Yep. It really is. So if you're got to do it once.
Got it. All right. So I've got kind of a wrap up question, because obviously we have all sorts of opinions about these things. You guys have been in the trenches many, many times, but if you were talking to a technology leader who is at the front end of a legacy software modernization project, if you could give them only one piece of advice, what would you distill it down to? I know this is a hard question, but give it a shot.
I could take that one first. I'm sure everybody else has some ideas, but one of the very common things I say to stick with is make sure you have your requirements. And oftentimes when you don't be afraid to reverse engineer that product to get those requirements. That's been a big thing that I've been able to do, in fact, with Symphonize multiple times, to make sure that I have what I call the product cookbook essentially in hand. I want that cookbook so that this way I know what I have to do in terms of my modernization journey. I know where the parity gaps are going to be. I know where the value prop is going to be. So I would say, yeah, make sure you have that basic requirements, and if you don't be afraid to reverse engineer that thing.
Yeah, the one thing that I could say is I have seen it a lot in my implementations where I'm part of is uh, having all the stakeholders involved, like stakeholders in the sense not just the business owners. So oftentimes I see the users, end user support teams, the product teams see the product, see the application first time in UAT. I mean, they haven't had enough training on that. I mean, they were not part of the designs. The earlier designs they're not sufficient user manuals. So now we are taking this application and we built over the period of time with the massive implementation cycles, and then suddenly take it in front of them and ask them to execute their use cases, which is a recipe for disaster. So we have to ensure that everybody is part of these incremental progress. So that is super critical, so that everybody is on the same page. I think even though it takes a lot more cost to involve the people, but for the complex projects, I think it's very critical that everybody is aligned. I think then these go no go decisions becomes easy. Otherwise, they will never give you a go. If you don't show the product till the last minute, and people are very nervous, and they will say no go. So which becomes the total project to be the delivery lines will keep on postponing.
So you're really advocating for bringing end users into the process much earlier. So what does that look like? How do you involve them in a way that they have the opportunity to plug in, but you don't bog down the process?
Yeah, it's kind of not. There are certain ways we could do that where they don't have to be like a part of the daily scrums or daily releases. It's more of like a kind of doing a A/B testing. It's called where you give it at a high level, what exactly happening, so that they're mentally prepared for the change that they are going to see. And then also they're also the part of the feedback loop early in the process is super critical. They don't really care, right, about what you do underneath. I mean, you say oftentimes We talk a lot about the technology, the whether that's cloud, whatever that's out there, but it's ultimately comes to the usability and uptime. Like does it have a guaranteed uptime? Like those are the critical things, and otherwise. Everybody pulled into it. The application goes down even for this day and age. If the application goes down for 5 minutes, that's a huge escalation, right? That's a huge cost to the business. So it's very important that they're aware of the what's in the cooks.
Thank you, Sridhar.
I would add to that. I mean, I think that the most underutilized asset in this process is the end user. I mean, the end user knows what's going on. The end user is the one who, like, when IT gets the thing back that says I don't like to click this 3 times, and IT sits and laughs over lunch about that. But if you're doing it all day long, that's a problem. End users. I started as an end user, right? So, and there was a path for end users as long as you could learn technology, but there should be a path for end users. I disagree with one thing you said, which is I think that they should be some representative of the end user should be at every step of this, because they're going to catch things that you won't, and they will think of the latent needs. Power users are the ones who will think of the latent needs, because they have been doing this thousands and thousands of times deeply, and they understand things in a way that you can't understand unless you've done it 1,000 times, and then you don't do it and you don't see the downstream effect and the upstream effect. That's very important. As a user, I took this. I was working, in the 80s on, $500,000 software, and they said to me, do this, go do this. And it turned out that the software they didn't understand how it was supposed to be done. It was supposed to be printed in color, basically, and supposed to go to the printer. This document was supposed to go to the printer, and it didn't do that. It just didn't do it. So I was like, I don't know how it does. So I mean, that got missed. That would not have gotten missed by users. I mean, it just wouldn't have. So they would have said, hey, what about color? But it got missed, and that's a big miss. So on the last day, as we were supposed to be delivering it to the printer, we found out that we couldn't go, and that was a big deal, because it was a big black eye. So you don't want to get those. But that's Sridhar's advice, not mine. My one piece of advice is just ignore the legacy system until you really just don't. It's almost like the legacy system does things that you're going to need to do, but don't use it as a basis for a model. Don't use it as the armature for starting this thing. Start, if you can, start from scratch and really imagine it without that, because that's the way you're going to get blinders. Start early and start, like, if we had nothing, what would we build here? That's really the question, because it's the fallacy of sunk cost to build it on your old ideas. If we had nothing, what would we want today? Because you don't have enough. You had nothing. The reality is you have nothing.
Well, and it kind of ties back in, like, we have different perspectives on this, right? We have Kaiser saying, like, be really, really clear about your requirements. And if you need to go ahead, right, and reverse engineer that current system.
Yep. But I'm not saying don't reverse engineer, but do that after you know what the requirements are. Get your requirements without looking at the legacy system. Then when they do involve the legacy system, then you go and you reverse engineer. You have to do that. I'm not arguing with that. I'm saying before you do that, imagine it as if you didn't have it, and then see what you can take. It's just another resource. So you might need it, but you might not, right? Because you may not even be using that whole part of that, because you can get it a microservice to do that part, right? So just ignore it for now.
Okay, so fixate on your requirements and make sure that your end users are involved early and often. So at the end, this actually does what the business needs it to do.
Yeah, ultimately, that's the idea.
That's the idea. All right, I'm going to flip this over to some Q&As that we have here in the chat. So I'm just going to toss these out, and whoever has thoughts on it, please go ahead and feel free to respond. So this first one is, we are a software SMB with a sizable R&D function. One issue we often struggle with during modernizations projects is build versus buy. There's always an inclination to build. Any pointers you can provide on how you go about making this build versus buy decision?
Just real quick, obviously there's the quality question, right? The quality of what you're looking to build versus buy, and where does that quality lie? I will selfishly admit, oftentimes I think about cost, right? So there is the concept of recurring versus one-time cost, right? So, if it's a one-time cost, that's great, right? But more than likely you're going to run into recurring these days, right? So what happens when it's always recurring? I'd say you have to be honest with yourself on, yeah, this is how much it's going to cost if I buy, but be honest with yourself on, this is how much it's going to cost me on a recurring basis if I build, right? And that's where you got to think across your organization. We're talking about support, the cost of support, cost of maintenance, cost of upgrading, cost of hosting. If you can project it out over a couple of years, that's even better. But yeah, there is the cost question that comes in for my mind, amongst other things. But I'm sure Ed and Sridhar have other things as well.
Well, I mean, I think there's two costs, right? There's the cost. There's no such thing as a one-time cost, right? Because if you own it, you own it.
Right.
So
from a P&L perspective, I can see it one time, but yeah.
It's just buried, right? It's just buried. So it doesn't. It's a hidden cost. But if you look at what you're putting, your smart minds are now going to something that is. So I think of things as important. Is it important, or is it strategic, right? Things that are important, like, you got to get the washout. You got to, it's printing. Printing is very important. We need things printed out, or whatever it is. It's important, but it's not strategic. If it's important, not strategic, outsource it, because that should be outsourced. If it's strategic and there's a proprietary value to it, then you can consider it. But I would still always, I mean, these days, when you buy something from somebody, when you buy Twilio, when you buy any of these, you're buying, they're just focused on their lane. They're not focused on anything else. They are so deeply focused there. It's very hard to compete with that. Your two headcount are not going to be flying around the world and finding out what's next in anything. They're not. And you're going to fall behind, and you're going to have a legacy system very soon. So if you're going to build it, it better be strategic, better be proprietary, and you better not be able to get it any other way. When I make the call, that's the call, because those people are out there trying to remain relevant, and as opposed to two engineers that could be doing something strategic that are not relevant.
No, as a consultant, I've been involved in these projects many times where these big consulting companies like Accenture, Deloitte, they come to the table just to dig into this question, build versus buy, and they charge like just to say what to do. I mean, that how complex this question is. I mean, this is definitely I totally agree with what Ed and Kaiser said. It's a what I see most of the times is that if we are really going to the buy, option, the vendor, what is their platform? Is it a SaaS, and how aligned they are to the industry and the product that they are building, right? So it's always been projected as a one thing in the beginning, and once you sign that paper and sucked into that platform, and then you are perpetual there, so with not enough with the roadmap not aligned to our needs, it's a painful thing, right? So these are we have to evaluate these things very closely, and I think oftentimes, even though the build looks to be a more cost impeding thing, but there is a long-term value and to that, and we probably this could be a mix of both, also an option, right? So I think we have to evaluate that.
Yeah,
That's
if I
my
might
2
add,
cents.
if I can add one more thing, dovetailing off of what you're both saying, actually. The question for me oftentimes comes to, and you're right, Sridhar, build is often, it's that shiny object that looks like it's going to be cheaper to do and quicker and all that stuff. I often have to take a step back and say, for that product or service, is it within our core competency, right? If I boil it down to those two words, core competency, can we do this really well, or is someone else going to do it better? That's where the quality question of buy versus build comes in, as I mentioned before. And I think that's part of what Ed's saying as well, is that when you use the Twilio example, right, that's like what they do. It's like all they do, right? Well, I shouldn't say all, but core, is that your core competency, right?
It's
So
strategic to them.
Exactly.
right.
Absolutely.
The question should be, prove to me that we can't buy this. It's not make buy 50-50. It's prove that there's a reason to build this, in my mind. It's a better way. Maybe that's true, but start with the default is to buy. Now prove me wrong.
Okay, so actually this next question kind of jumps off of this, important versus strategic core competency issue. And it's, when would you suggest engaging with a development partner for a modernization project versus when to go with internal resources? We have talented R&D, but I wonder if they should be focusing on building the core product. At the same time, we seem to have a hard time making a business case for bringing in an external partner.
Interesting question.
Comes down to scale, I think.
Skills.
Scale,
Right?
skills.
Scale.
Yeah, it's
good.
Skill set, absolutely, yes. And that kind of comes down to the whole core competency thing too. Scalability, right? Or do you really want to get into the business of trying to scale? Because it's not as easy as people think. It's, we're talking about, as your requirements grow, trying to scale your internal resources is hard. It's expensive. It's, as much as we think we can do it at will. There again, coming back to the concept of core competencies, there's some parties that might do it better. So
I think that when you can't do all this, you can't keep the business running and do this development. The important thing to know is that you need your best people, the ones with the institutional knowledge. Those are the people who get called every day when something goes wrong with the business every day. They get called because they're your go-to people, but those are the people you want on your project as well. So by bringing in extra smart people with technical knowledge that's broader and who are being exposed to a lot more stuff, your best people are almost always also behind on what's going on with current tech, and they don't like that because they have been so subsumed by the business that you've got your best people who are not feeling competitive in the marketplace. So they feel like they're becoming dinosaurs. So the way we've solved it with Symphonize is we've brought people in who have the technical expertise to get us over the hump, but we've also paired them and partnered them with people internally who are the institutional knowledge experts and who have the capacity to learn this, but they just don't have the time because they're always being, so if you go with your less, remember, they used to be high potential. The people who are your subject matter experts and your institutional knowledge people, those used to be hypo people, but you didn't develop them. So now you have to redevelop them and you get both. If you don't do that, you end up with new people without the institutional knowledge, learning new technology and being misinformed about what you're going to get. So you really need to pair those things. It goes back to this conversancy thing. It's amazing how much IT people know about the business because they have dug through the bowels of the business and they know. So I think that the key with bringing in a partner is make sure you bring them in to do the POCs, to bring you options. And that's what we did. We had lots of meetings to say, what are our options here? And then we did little mini POCs with people who were technically skilled enough so that it didn't take forever to learn the tools, so we could just do it.
So you're really pointing out that there's potentially at least an important reskilling component to these legacy modernization projects, because at the end of the day, your people need to be comfortable and conversant in operating them for the long term.
And they get there by shadowing somebody who's an expert, but who doesn't have any business, doesn't know your business.
Right.
And this way, they're again, the level of collaboration and the level of hybrid knowledge is going up, and that's really the key at every level, whether it's business or whether it's technical and institutional, it doesn't matter.
Very cool. Okay, I've got one more here. Oh, maybe I might have time for two more. Question: our legacy software is too tightly integrated into too many systems, both upstream and downstream. It is a daunting task to modernize and replace it, especially due to the cascading impact on other systems. How do we handle this?
So one thing that I recently came across in one implementation is typically this particular scenario that we ran into. it's plugged too deep into the ecosystem. And then the approach that we actually evaluated here are almost, I think we took it also, is that we 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 try to keep the interfaces intact, and then try to put a wrapper around the application that is to be replaced, right? And that is the it's a very cost intensive, right? It's going to take extra cost for that, but it is less, it will set us up for a success, I think. The other thing is that, also make these communications more like, okay, like asynchronous, about putting a message queues around, so that, these things are not synchronous communication. So those are some technical things that we did, where we call it a pub sub model. It's one of the design patterns that we use, especially in this case, where you are ensuring that your messages are not getting dropped off, but at the same time, you're also not impacting the other systems that are relying on this. So that's this is one of the key thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's almost like it's a containerizing approach, really, but you're just wrapping instead. And I think there are tools. I mean, that's sort of the MuleSoft. They sort of came about, and it's a middleware kind of. It's a reinvention of the middleware days, which were not pleasant. Yeah, and I think you're right. It's going to cost more, and it's going to be harder. But that's the first thing to do. If you know that's the case, then go do that first, because it's going to solve a lot of your data model problems anyway for later. So do that first, and that way it's out of the way.
All right, next question. There are several low-code, no-code options for building new software, including mobile and enterprise apps. But there seems to be a reluctance to adopt these technologies due to vendor lock-in and customizability. Do you see these technologies playing a role in legacy modernization?
I think it's there is definitely this space is very much evolving, is what I see. And also, I don't see one versus another, like, comparing when it truly comes to the cost, be it AWS or Google, GCP or Azure. The costs differences between these low code or no code apps is very it's not very high. It's in the same part with a slight variation here and there. But I think that there is definitely a downside, locking it to them. And but there are other frameworks coming up, which is called serverless, which is a layer on top of these cloud providers, an abstraction, which will help in the future state to be a non-locked, right? And where you could always switch between the other ones, but that interoperability also causes a little bit more lag in the communication and in the interfaces. You're doing something, it has to take one more hoop to finish your task. That's there, but that gives you a lot of flexibility.
For me, the low code, no code, or even that whole concept is, I would focus on that for even if there were no code tools that you could use, I would still have technical people use them first, and be very solid about it. But the idea of having users using low code, no code tools to extend the ultimate software to do what they want on a daily basis, instead of being spreadsheet masters, they can be low code, no code, programmers, and extend it in a safe way and do their work and make their work better. That's to me right now, that's the best use of it, when it's appropriate for the application. Letting non-coders code, that's a good thing. Letting them build your infrastructure, not a good idea yet.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Awesome.
All right. Let's see. This guest says, agree with Ed that people are a big part of the equation in transformation projects. What are some of the cultural and organizational changes that may be necessary to successfully modernize software? And how do you get everyone on board?
IT becomes the tyrannical ruler of all. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I don't know if you will realistically, at least I've never encountered a situation where I was able to get everybody on board. Um, you know, and of course, in my opinion, you create avenues for people to be able to, as I call it, jump on the train, right? And not just inside of the technology group, but you have to offer those avenues across your organization as well. There's a lot of cross functionality with the technology group and the rest of the organization that we often don't talk about. But if you can create those opportunities to be a part of the modernized product and create, not create, but define actual roles and socialize that, you'll see, look, people are either going to jump on the train or they're not. Yeah. And I think that's just where I generally take it, is provide the opportunities, encourage people, get on the train or stay off. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, leaders, you have to pick leaders from their, it's tough. It's a tough call, because if you take people out of their departments and you put them in this cross-functional team, eventually they're seen as traitors, right? They used to be your people, but now they're part of this team that's doing all the stuff that you don't really like. I mean, that's the truth, right? There is an inherent human resistance to change, right? And so when one of the people you trust goes in there and then they drink the Kool-Aid, then they stop being trustable. So I think it's important to keep the communication often. They shouldn't just be going back and forth every so often and reporting what's happening. They should be a conduit. But I think it's important to have that cross-functional team, because that's when people see the value of it. People see that these other people have real problems too, and they're adding real value. It's not just us against them, which when things go wrong, things become us against them, and cover your ass, excuse my French, but that's really bad. You got to have it be together, and you do that by picking the leaders out and putting them together.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely a create evangelists that way internally, and that's really what I generally would look to do in order to get people on the train. Is I do need those evangelists out there, but it's my responsibility to insert that framework essentially.
Makes total sense.
No, I think that's a really good point, that essentially you're creating the framework that enables this, but at the end of the day, you can't necessarily own the outcome, right? The train is leaving the station, it's moving, and you're on board or you're not, but you need enough of those people on board to really make it a success.
Yes. The Japanese term for census is called nemawashi. It's the same thing as planting a plant and having it take root. So it's like you're taking an idea from one person's head and putting it in another, and it roots into your head. And that's what you need. You need nemawashi.
Oh, I love that. It's so poetic.
It is. Except when you're trying to smash people, get a hole in their head.
That's the ugly part.
Yeah,
All right. I think I've got one final question, and then we will wrap this up. Are there any technologies that you would actively avoid in legacy modernization projects?
I don't want to get sued.
This could lead into a war pretty much here.
Well, we could go for categories of technology if we don't want to name brands.
Is there any technology you would avoid?
I generally have had good luck on the AWS marketplace. I'll say that. I'll take the other approch.
There you go. The positive spin. I like that.
Spin. I generally have good luck on the AWS marketplace. Yes.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, definitely the vendor lock is the one thing that where you build something where you're locked into it. Be it a legacy, like a desktop app, those kind of things are anyway, it's gone anyway. I think it's more like yeah, I mean, this is beating in the cloud is definitely is valuable, but it's also make sure that we are not locked into it, perpetually, where you have like a lot of data, especially. So this is why this question is so complex. It's not a simple I mean, we can't look at it as a one single application. We have to look at the data, look at the security aspects, and the uptime, 0% downtime upgrades, and also it's definitely it's a much in-depth analysis is needed, and I think to when we make it. But vendor locking is one thing that we should avoid. We should have the flexibility, but in approaching this one, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I always look at the human part of these things, and the facts are humans do two things very well all the time. We anchoring bias is a fact. It's a behavior of ours. It's a survival instinct. We will almost always favor the choice that we see first. Usually the thing that we see first is the thing we're familiar with already, right? So we tend to go with the things we know, and that's not always a good idea. And then anchoring bias is followed by confirmation bias, when all of the information we get confirms our former decision, which is another bad idea. So I would say the technology to avoid is any technology that you're choosing because of those two factors. You should get those factors out of your choice, and then you'll be making good decisions. It doesn't matter. The technology doesn't matter. What matters is that you're making good decisions, and then you won't choose the wrong technology.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that does it for us today. Thank you so much, Kaiser, Ed, and Sridhar, for sharing all of your experience and your expertise here. As I mentioned, this recording will be available. We'll send it out to everybody who registered. It'll also be available on our website. And thank you again, and I hope to do this again soon. This was a fascinating discussion.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.